It was a cold night in 1938, in a small village tucked between the mountains of Erzurum. A child came into the world. The wind carried his first breath across the mountains. One day, his voice would be heard all across the world, inspiring millions. His home was a humble one, filled with faith and grace. Inside, a mother whispered the Almighty's names over her newborn son. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, our story began. A story not of power or wealth, but of service, of light, of one heart given entirely to Allah. Fethullah Gulen was born in a difficult and harsh time of history. The Adhan had been translated to Turkish, and many religious institutions were closed with the accusation of being against the Republic. In fact, in 1938, when his father took the newborn to register him legally, the civil registry officer refused to register him due to the name's religious undertone. Instead, the family had to wait until 1942 when his younger brother was born. Even then, the officer registered him as Fethullah Gulen instead of Muhammad Fethullah Gulen, as the family had intended, and his baby brother was named as Saifullah instead of Sibghatullah. He grew up in a home where faith was not a theory, it was life itself. Every day began with the Adhan and ended with prayer. Every corner of the house was filled with remembrance of Allah. His mother, Rafia Hanum, was a woman who glowed with piety and sincerity. Before the sun rose, she would wash her hands in the freezing water, spread her prayer rug before the stove, and whisper through her tears. Little Fethullah would awaken to that sound, a mother's supplication, and something in his heart would stir before he even knew what prayer was. She was his first teacher and his first mirror of mercy. She taught him the Quran letter by letter. With her help, Fethullah was able to complete his first khatam at the age of 4. His father, Ramiz Efendi, was the imam of the village. In the Gulen household, the lamp would stay on the whole night. Ramiz Efendi would sit with his books, pages yellowed, corners torn. Fethullah, still a boy, would sit beside him in silence. About his father, Fethullah would later say, "My father taught me my religion and my faith. He was very careful to ensure I didn't stray. He was my first Arabic teacher and started me on the path to becoming a hafiz. After the night prayer, he would memorize the Quran with me. I don't ever remember my father getting angry with me." In that house, learning was not a task, it was a form of worship. Love was not a feeling, it was a duty. And faith was not inherited, it was built, layer by layer, through tears, patience, and prayer. From a mother who loved without condition and a father who taught without anger, a child learned what it meant to live for something greater than himself. He did not yet know that his love, this discipline, this rhythm of devotion, would one day move nations, heal hearts, and light a path for generations to come. In 1949, when Ramiz Efendi was appointed as the imam of a neighboring village, the family moved to Alvad, Turkey. This move brought young Fethullah's formal schooling to an early pause. He was only in the 3rd grade, yet his thirst for knowledge did not fade. In time, he would complete his primary education by passing the required exams, all while continuing his studies in the madrasas of Erzurum. In Alvar, he studied under his father's guidance and, by 1951, completed his memorization of the Quran. He would later recall those days saying, "As much as I could find time between house chores and tending the animals, I memorized the Quran. Even so, on the days I studied well, I could memorize about half a juz." The Quran became his lifelong compass, shaping his thoughts, his heart, and his mission. Reflecting on it later, he said, "But I must say with complete sincerity, every time I read it, it was as if I was discovering a new horizon, new continents. I believe that everyone who gives their heart to it must feel the same." In the summer of 1952, he officially began his madrasa education in the neighboring village of Kurshunlu, learning tajweed under Haji Sidqa Efendi. Each day he would walk 7 to 8 kilometers to reach his teacher. With the encouragement of Allah'lı Efe Hazretleri, he later moved to Erzurum to continue his studies at the Kurshunlu Mosque Madrasa. His progress was swift. Within 2.5 months, he surpassed students who had been there for more than a year. In the years that followed, he studied in many madrasas under various scholars, spending every waking moment in class, in study, or in contemplation over what he had learned. At the age of 14, he delivered his first sermon, stepping in for his father. At first, he felt a wave of nervousness, but it quickly gave way to passion. What followed was a remarkable sermon that moved the congregation deeply. Many were so affected that they nearly lost themselves in emotion. That first sermon in Allah marked a turning point. The following year, during Ramadan, at his father's insistence, he decided to travel beyond Erzurum. Throughout the holy month, he journeyed through Amasya, Tokat, and Sivas, delivering sermons that would ignite hearts and signal the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The passing of Allah'lı Efe Hazretleri during those years would leave a deep mark on Fethullah Gulen. He would later describe it as one of the most shaking moments of his life. He could not recall exactly when he had first come to know the saintly Imam of Allah. For as long as he could remember, both his parents had drawn from that pure and spiritual spring. He had been a child, barely 16 years old, when Efe Hazretleri departed this world. In his own words, he confessed that even in his immaturity, his earliest awareness, his first stirrings of faith were awakened by that radiant soul. "Whatever I can sense, feel, and intuit today," he once said, "I owe to the impressions that his spirit left upon my heart in those youthful days." The loss of Allah'lı Efe Hazretleri was not merely the death of a man, it was the fading of a light that had quietly illuminated the hearts of thousands. Yet in that sorrow, a seed was planted in Fethullah's soul, a vow, silent but certain, to carry forward the same flame of guidance, love, and service that Efe Hazretleri had kindled in his time. This new flame found new nourishment in Erzurum. While studying there, he attended lessons given by Muzaffar Aslan, a distinguished student of Bediüzzaman Said Nursi. Through those lessons, Fethullah Gulen was introduced to the Risale-i Nur, the luminous writings that would shape his spiritual outlook for life. He was captivated by what he heard. The depth of those discussions drew him in completely. What moved him most was Muzaffar Aslan had the other students of Ustad Said Nursi, their humility, their sincerity, their life that mirrored that of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. "I was already someone in love with the companions," Fethullah would later recall. "And when I saw him, I said to myself, these are the people I have been searching for." From that moment on, I never thought of leaving again. From the passing of Allah'lı Efe Efendi to the discovery of the Risale-i Nur, his journey of faith deepened, shaped by the light of mentors, the legacy of saints, and a growing conviction that knowledge, devotion, and service must walk hand in hand. The boy who once whispered prayers beside his mother's rug was now walking into the wide world. His heart, still wrapped in the scent of that humble home, was restless, not for fame, but for truth. He left the mountains of Erzurum and crossed the plains of Anatolia with a single mission: to seek knowledge that could heal both mind and soul. With his father's urging and his mother's hesitant consent, Fethullah set out from Erzurum to Edirne, marking his first great journey away from home. A family relative, Hüseyin Top Hoca, welcomed him and helped him settle in. In those early months, he led prayers and gave sermons in a small neighborhood mosque called Ak Masjid, where sincerity and passion quickly drew the attention of the locals. On August 6, 1959, he began his first official duty as the second imam of the historic Üç Şerefeli Mosque. He lived simply in a small window cell that barely had enough room for him to lay down next to his collection of books. Yet that humble room became his sanctuary, a place of study, reflection, and quiet prayer. What mattered to him was not comfort, but the calling itself, the chance to serve, to teach, and to grow in faith. It was a beginning marked by sincerity and sacrifice, one that would carry him far beyond the minarets of Edirne and into the hearts of countless souls he would one day inspire. He served humbly in Edirne until 1961, when he was called to military duty. Those years were harsh, marked by discipline, long days, and the quiet trials of conscience. Even in uniform, he could not silence the voice within him that longed to speak of faith. He continued to give sermons in mosques where he was stationed, a devotion that occasionally brought him into trouble with his superiors. The strain of those days eventually took its toll, and illness forced him to return to Erzurum, where he spent nearly a year recovering. But his heart remained drawn to Edirne. After his recovery, he returned once more, resuming his mission where it had begun. On July 4, 1964, he took up duty as a Quran teacher and honorary imam of the Darul Hadith Mosque. For a short while, he shared a small house with the newly appointed mufti of the city and lifelong friend, Professor Dr. Swat Yildirim. Within the modest walls of the mosque's imam room, he began holding intimate lessons and heartfelt gatherings. That small chamber soon became the cradle of a growing movement of learning and service. He would later recall that these were among the most blessed days of his life. Days when, in the quiet corners of Edirne, a new generation of students began to awaken under his care. What had started in a humble room would one day ripple far beyond the city, carrying the same spirit of sincerity and devotion that had always guided his path.
El 59'un başından başladım.
Kaç?
63 sene kaldım.
Burada
3 sene yakın bu pencerenin içinde.
Askerlik.
2,5 seneyi aştı yani. İşte ondan sonra buradan askere gittim ben. Giderken de birkaç kitabım vardı. Küçük bir kütüphanem. Oradaki başka bir pencereye koydum. Askerlik dönüşü tuttuğum yere taşıdım.
Sizinle birlikte başka kalan var mıydı hocam burada?
Hayır yok, tek başıma kalıyordum.
Yani bu pençelerde başka bir kullanılan,
Hayır,
diğer
hayır.
pençeleri falan kullanılan
Hayır hayır yok. Sadece ben kalıyordum, tek başımaydım. Bilmiyorum, içinde
Her tarafı hatıradır da hocam.
3 seneye yakın bir zaman kaldım yani. O 3 sene içinde. Dünya kadar şeyler oldu. Yemek yemiyordum çok. Yani sabahları bir poğaça yiyordum, çay içiyordum. Tek öğlenleri bir aşçı Mümin Efendi vardı. Oraya gidiyor. Nebati şeylerden bir şey yiyordum.
After a year of service in Edirne, he was appointed to Kırklareli in 1965, where his calm presence and heartfelt sermons quickly drew the affection of the local community. Yet, this assignment was not to last for long. He was reassigned to Izmir as the city's central preacher. It was a time of new beginnings, and Izmir, a meeting point between East and West, would become the stage where his first voice began to reach beyond the walls of a single mosque. In Izmir, he found a new home in Kestane Pazarı Mosque, on behest of Yaşar Tunagül Hoca, the previous central preacher of the city. He volunteered in Kestane Pazarı Quran School to serve as a dormitory principal. It was more than a place of worship. It was a sanctuary for youth, where the echo of the adhan mingled with the laughter of students and the restless hopes of generations seeking meaning. Though only in his mid-20s, he was asked to help oversee the dormitory of the Quran school there. Many were surprised to see someone so young entrusted with leadership, and some even doubted he could fill the role. But his sincerity and tireless devotion soon quieted doubts. He refused any salary for his service, choosing instead to live simply in a small shed within the courtyard of the dormitory. That tiny space, barely large enough for a bed, a lamp, and a few shelves of books, became his world. There, he read, reflected, and prayed late into the night, often sleeping only a few hours before dawn. His routine was relentless, traveling to give sermons across Izmir, often spending nights on the road, and returning at dawn to teach his students. He would preach every Friday at Kestane Pazarı, then spend his weekends delivering talks in distant towns before hurrying back to resume his lessons without rest. His body was weary, but his spirit was inexhaustible.
Hoca Efendi'den önce tabii Yaşar Tunagür hocamız bizim Kestane Pazarı'nın müdürüydü. Tabii evli, evi var, çoluğu çocuğu vardı. O mesela akşam dersler bitinceye kadar hani saat 5, 6, 7 kaçta bitiyorsa dersi sabahtan akşama kadar gündüzleri bulundurdu Kestane Pazarı'nda. Hoca Efendi geldikten sonra artık Hoca Efendi devamlı gece gündüz orada kalıyordu. Yani dışarıda bir işi olmadıkça hani akşamları derslere, sohbetlere gidiyordu. Hafta sonu çevre vilayet kazaları, hani Hoca Efendi'nin İzmir vaizliğinin, merkez vaizliğinin yanında çevre vaizliği de vardı. Hani çevredeki bölge vaizliği, çevredeki hani Aydın, Denizli, Manisa, Afyon gibi, Manisa gibi yerlere de Hoca Efendi vaazlara giderdi.
When he first ascended the pulpit of Kestane Pazarı Mosque, his voice wavered, gentle, searching, like a candle testing the wind. But as he spoke, the uncertainty melted away. His words carried warmth and truth, touching hearts not through eloquence, but through sincerity. In his sermons, there were no walls, only bridges. He spoke not to command, but to awaken, not to seek followers, but to serve. It was in those sleepless years between the classrooms of Kestane Pazarı and the roads that carried his sermons across Izmir that the seeds of a lifelong vision began to take root, a dream of education, faith, and service living side by side in harmony. In those early days, he began gathering small circles of students and friends. They would study, pray, share bread, and speak about how they could serve others. He was still so young, and yet his eyes carried the sorrow and strength of centuries. He would weep for humanity, for those lost in ignorance, for those trapped in arrogance, for the youth who had forgotten their purpose. He was even known in Izmir as the Weeping Imam. He saw what many could not, that the world's healing would not come from power or politics, but from purified hearts. One educated soul, rooted in faith and reason, could illuminate 1,000 lives. What started within the modest walls of Kestane Pazarı soon spread across the Aegean region as he began leading informal coffee house talks, gatherings where faith and reflection met the ordinary man. These were not lectures delivered from pulpits, but quiet conversation shared over tea. In village cafes and small town squares, he spoke of faith, character, and service, reaching people where they lived.
Tabii kıymetli kardeşlerim, hani bizim çocukluğumuzda dine hizmet denilince sadece işte imamlar, vaizler, müftüler camilerde camiye gelenlere vaaz eder. İşte din ders hocaları okullarda din dersi okutur. Bundan ibaretti. Hani bir yurt yapılacaksa İmam Hatip talebelerine yapılır. Kur'an kursları yapılır. İmam Hatip'in Kur'an kursunun haricinde, yüksek İslam enstitülerinin haricinde okullardaki talebelerle meşgul olmak, o talebelere burs vermek gibi bir şey hiç kimsenin gündeminde yoktu Türkiye'de. Hoca Efendi bu anlayışı getirmiş oldu yani. Camiye gelmeyen insanlara da nasıl anlatırız? Acaba, tabii ben ilk bu fikir kimden çıktığını tam bilmiyorum. Hani belki bazı abilerimiz Hoca Efendi'ye, hani Hoca Efendi böyle tekliflere çok açık bir insandı yani. Bazı abilerimiz de teklif etmiş olabilir. Yani hocam acaba kahvelere gitsek, orada siz sohbet etseniz olabilir mi gibi teklif edilmiş de olabilir. Belki Mehmet Hocam'ın hatıratında vardır bu. O meşgul oluyordu, hep izinleri o alıyordu sağ olsun o zamanlar. Ama Hoca Efendi hani bunu ister kendi düşünerek böyle bir şey yapsak demiş olsun, ister birilerinden teklif gelmiş olsun. Hoca Efendi hemen buna açık durdu yani. Halbuki o zamanlar sağcı, solcu çatışmaları çok fazla. Yani şimdi Hoca Efendi bir kahvede konuşurken komünistler basabilirdi yani. Buna rağmen bütün kahvelerde malum oyun oynanır. Yani o oyun oynayan insanların içerisine gideceksin, sen dini sohbet yapacaksın. Hiç kimsenin aklından, fikrinden geçecek bir şey değil. Ama Hoca Efendi buna da açık oldu yani. Hemen bu sohbetler başladı. Ve ilk başlarken de etrafındakiler dinliyordu. Öbür taraftakiler oyun oynuyor filan. Hani bu kahvede böyle bir ilan da yapılmıyordu yani. Hani bugün işte Fethullah Gülen gelecek, bu kahvede sohbet edecek mesela, bir levha filan, bir afiş asılabilir. Öyle bir şey de yapılmıyordu. Varıyorduk kahveye, kahveciyle önceden konuşuluyordu. Emniyetten de Mehmet Ali Hocam rahmetli izin alıyordu hangi kahvede sohbet olacaksa. Hatıratında onları anlatıyor. Bayağı zor alıyormuş o izinleri rahmetli. Sonra varılıyor, işte kahveciyle anlaşmış oluyorsunuz. Tabii kahvecinin kazancı ne oluyor? O vesileyle kalabalık bir cemaat gelmiş oluyor. O kadar insan işte çay kahve içmiş oluyor. Onun kazancı da oluyor.
He lived simply, refusing all forms of personal gain. During his 5 years at Kestanapazarı, he accepted no payment, not even for his daily needs. He would later recall that he even paid for the water he used for ablution, unwilling to take anything that belonged to his students or the institution. During the summers, he began organizing tent camps in the valleys of the Aegean, simple gatherings where learning, faith, and camaraderie came together under open skies. These camps were meant to help the dormitory students preserve and strengthen the knowledge that they had gained throughout the year. Fethullah Gulen personally oversaw every detail, from logistics and meals to the lessons themselves. For 2.5 months each summer, he lived side by side with his students, teaching them not only matters of faith, but also discipline, responsibility, and service to others. What began as a modest effort soon grew beyond expectations. Each year, the number of participants nearly doubled, and one camp was no longer enough to contain the eager hearts that came to learn. No one could have foreseen it then, but those small gatherings in the small valleys of the Aegean were the first sparks of something much larger, a vision of education and faith that would one day spread every corner of the world. Through those years of travel, prayer, and quiet struggle, his message began to take root. From mosque pulpits to coffee house gatherings to camps, he was shaping a new way of reaching hearts, not through authority or position, but through humility, sincerity, and the unspoken power of a life in service. The 1970s, Anatolia was wary, torn between change and tradition, between faith and the new idols of the age. Yet, wherever confusion spread, a gentle light began to rise, not the gleam of wealth nor the flare of power, but the humble candle lit by a heart that would not surrender its hope. In Fethullah Gulen's sermons and lectures, there were no boundaries. He spoke to teachers, to workers, to mothers, to children, to anyone who carried a soul and a conscience. He spoke of a faith that serves, a knowledge that heals, a love that rebuilds the world. However, in 1971, as the country edged toward the March 12th memorandum, Fethullah Gulen stepped down from his duties at the Kestanapazarı Quran School and moved to a small house in Güzelyadı. After years of tireless teaching and travel, the sudden stillness felt heavy. He filled those quiet days with books, contemplation, and long hours of prayer, sensing that the calm before him was only temporary. When the political turmoil deepened, waves of arrests swept across the country. Many were detained without cause, and he too was taken into custody. At the detention center, his hair was cut and his photograph taken from every angle. Yet even there, he remained composed. Before being confined, he requested water, performed his ablution, and prayed beneath the open sky, a small act of serenity amid uncertainty. He spent weeks in detention, sharing a narrow cell with other scholars and students. His spirit remained unshaken. At last, after months of hearings, the court ordered his release. After his release in late 1971, Fethullah Gulen returned quietly to his duties. Bureaucratic restrictions delayed his reinstatement, so he spent some time in Erzurum before resuming his sermons in Izmir. Soon after, in February 1972, he was appointed as the central preacher of Edremit, a place he accepted reluctantly, leaving behind the friends and familiarity of Izmir. In Edremit, his focus on students and education deepened, and his small gatherings of young learners became seeds of a great vision. After 2 years, he was reassigned to Manisa. His work there continued in the same rhythm: sermons, study circles, and youth camps. Yet the sense of mission began to sharpen. By the mid-1970s, his influence reached beyond mosques and classrooms. He began giving public conferences on topics like the Quran and science, Darwinism, the Golden Generation, and social justice and prophethood.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي
Altın nesil hazırcı olmayacak. O saksılarda büyüyen saksı çiçeği değildir. O masanın başında bir kalem efendisi de değildir. O çilekeş bir nesildir. O ıstıraplı bir nesildir. Onun bir tek iniltisinde binlerce neyin feryadı gizlidir. Kalbi onun şak şak, parça parçadır. Mevlana'nın sinesi gibi parça parçadır. Ümmetin derdiyle yanan ve bu dertten ötürü cehennemin alevleri içinde yanmaya razıyım diyen insanların sinesi meknidir onun kalbinde.
These talks drew thousands, from Ankara to Konya, from Malatya to Antalya, including people who had never stepped into a mosque before. They were drawn not only by his eloquence, but by the sincerity that filled his words. After Manisa, he was appointed to Bonnova, where he served until 1980. From there, his message began spreading far beyond the cities of the Aegean. In 1977, he traveled to Germany and across Europe, delivering talks to Turkish workers and small communities abroad, reminding them of their faith and purpose far from home. In Istanbul, his voice echoed in the grand mosques of Yeni Cami and Sultanahmet, where thousands, from ordinary citizens to ministers, came to listen. In 1979, he began writing for Sızıntı magazine, where his essays carried his compassion and vision to readers across the nation. Through those years, something profound was unfolding. Across towns and cities, small groups of students began gathering in mosques, in rented rooms, and quiet basements. These were not formal organizations, but gatherings of sincerity, places where faith met intellect and service found expression in daily life. A few rented rooms became student houses. A few discussions turned into study circles. And wherever he went, Fethullah Gulen reminded them of the words of Ali radiallahu anh, "Be a person among people." These gatherings began to shape a new understanding, that true faith was not withdrawal from the world, but engagement with it. Engagement filled with faith and serving others for the sake of Allah.
Ben 75'te üniversiteyi kazandım. 75'te dershane kurumsal olarak yoktu. Ama ne vardı? Böyle bir cami altında bir sınıfta, sınıfımsı bir yerde 30 kadar Türkiye'nin değişik şehirlerinden mezun olmuş, üniversiteye hazırlık için, sadece üniversiteye hazırlık için bir sene ders çalışacak insanlar. Hizmet o zaman İzmir'de çok yoğundu. İzmir'e gelmişler, evlerde kalıyorlar ve o kursa geliyorlar. Öyle bir Salepçioğlu Camii'nin altında öyle bir yer vardı, yarı bodrum. Sonra Bozyaka Yurdu yapıldı. Bozyaka Yurdu yapıldıktan sonra hafta sonlarında İmam Hatip talebeleri, Atatürk Lisesi talebeleri, Namık Kemal talebeleri, İzmir'in liselerinin talebeleri, yakın ilçelerin talebeleri cumartesi pazar geliyorlardı. Orada üniversiteye hazırlık dersi alıyorlardı. Bir de Balçova Camisi'nin altında 4 sınıflık bir yer vardı. İşte o mezun tiplerden, Salepçioğlu dediğimin gelişmiş, sayıcı artmış şekli. Orada da 4 sınıfta 88 bir sene, ertesi sene 110 talebeye kurs verilmişti. Kurumsal anlamda, yani baya bildiğimiz tabelalı falan, vergili, şulu bulu, yani öbürü biraz daha amatör seviyede eve gelen çocuğa ders çalıştırma mantığıyla. Veya TÖV kütüphanesi var, kütüphaneye ders çalışmaya geliyor çocuklar. Üniversitede okuyan bir öğretmen namzeti bir abi gidiyor onlara, ödevlerine yardımcı oluyor seviyesinde. Yahut da işte üniversiteye hazırlanan çocuklara başlangıç zili belli olmayan, bitiş zili belli olmayan formatta derslerine yardımcı olma mahiyetindeyken sonra artık kurumsal bir hal kazandı. Çankaya semtinde bir yer tutuldu. Darbeden, 80 darbesinden 15 gün evvel kiralama hadisesi gerçekleşti. O yıl başladı. Ben bir sabahçılar varken sadece yüksek lisansa başlamıştım. Sonra öğrenci sınıflarda oluverince yarıda bıraktım. Bırakırken de ya iyiydi ya, akademisyen olacaktım ben ya, nereden çıktı bu ya falan demedim. Hatta kimseye bile danışmadan, ya Deli misin sen ya? Bu kadar talebe var. Bunlara dersi kim anlatacak? Tabii ki biz anlatacağız şeklinde bıraktık. Bıraktığımız yerden öğretmenlik devam etmiş oldu.
Those candles became study halls, those study halls became schools, and those schools became hope for the poor, for the searching, for the generations yet to come. These were the years of quiet beginnings, when Hizmet was not yet a name, but a living spirit moving through hearts. A movement was not founded, it was born. Born in those humble study rooms, in the whispers of prayer, and in the steadfast faith of a teacher whose dream was never to be known, but to kindle light wherever darkness lingered. The 1980s, a decade of shadows and storms. The country trembled under the weight of another military coup. Voices were silenced and fear lingered in every corner. Hoca Efendi, like many others, could no longer continue his duties. His health weakened, his sermons ceased, and for a time he withdrew, not in defeat, but in reflection. He had been appointed to Çanakkale, but illness prevented him from beginning. As the grip of martial law lightened, an arrest warrant was issued in his name, and he was forced to live cautiously away from public view. Eventually, he resigned from public service, yet while many fell into despair, he took to the roads, traveling quietly across Anatolia, visiting old friends and teachers. Though barred from public preaching, Hoca Efendi's service did not end. It simply took a quieter form. For nearly 6 years, as the nation sought its balance, he journeyed across Anatolia, visiting dormitories, study halls, and student houses founded by those inspired by his early teachings. In those humble spaces, small rooms steeped in tea and the sounding of turning pages, he found the living continuation of his dream. Even in silence, his influence deepened. His voice no longer rose from mosque pulpits, but from the lives of those who carried his ideals forward. And though his path was not free of trial, eventually being detained at Burdur in 1986 and released after days of questioning, he met every hardship with patience, turning endurance itself into his greatest sermon. After years of silence, he returned to the pulpit at Büyük Çamlıca Mosque on the night of Mi'raj. Soon after, he set out for Hajj. Yet even there, difficulties found him. Accusations were made back in Turkey. Travel restrictions were imposed. Though urged to remain in safety abroad, he refused. Choosing hardship over exile, he crossed the Syrian border on foot, weary but resolute, and surrendered himself to the authorities in Turkey, only to be declared innocent once again. In 1988, Fethullah Gulen students founded Yeni Ümit, New Hope, a journal that would carry his reflections on faith, morality, and the human heart. His first essay, In the Humble Climate of New Hope, became both a message and a mirror, a call to patience, sincerity, and service. 1989 marked a quiet but energetic return. After years of silence and travel, Fethullah Gulen once again began to appear before the public, his voice steadier, his message deeper. In January, he resumed preaching in Istanbul, beginning a new chapter at the historic Valide Sultan Mosque in Üsküdar. Week after week, for more than a year, he spoke about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his life, his mercy, his example, unveiling a vision of faith that was living, compassionate, and alive in every detail of daily life. These sermons would later be collected in a 3-volume work titled Sonsuz Nur, The Infinite Light, a tribute to the messenger whose example had shaped his own. Beyond Üsküdar, his words began to echo across Istanbul and beyond. On Sundays, he preached in the great mosques Süleymaniye, Pendik, Sultanahmet, and Bakırköy, as well as in Izmir, Hisar, and Şadırvan mosques. He spoke to crowds that spilled into the courtyards and streets. During Ramadan, he delivered special evening sermons at the Fatih Mosque, guiding hearts from iftar to the night prayer. His final talk coinciding with the sacred Laylatul Qadr, the night of power. These gatherings rekindled the flame that has long been kept alive in quiet homes and distant study halls. And soon, that light began to spread beyond the mosques, beyond Istanbul, beyond Turkey itself. The dawn of the 1990s, a new light began to spread, a light that no border could contain. What began in small rooms and study circles in Anatolia was now reaching the farthest corners of the earth. From Istanbul's narrow alleys to the steppes of Central Asia, from the desert of Africa to the crowded streets of New York, a humble wave of teachers, doctors, and dreamers were moving forward with one purpose: to serve. In September 1991, Fethullah Gulen's years of preaching on the Prophet's life culminated in the Eternal Message Symposium, hosted by Zaman newspaper for Mawlid celebrations. Surrounded by leading theologians and academics from across the world, he offered a short but deeply humble address, thanking the scholars and reminding the audience that no one could ever do justice to the messenger's greatness. By then, the seeds he had planted decades earlier had begun to bloom. His students, now educators, professionals, and volunteers, were traveling the world, opening schools, dormitories, and cultural centers. Those first schools in the early 1990s in Baku, Tashkent, and Bishkek, and beyond, became sanctuaries of peace, where once there had been division, now there was dialogue.
Sonra okul sektöründe olsun, dershane sektöründe olsun kendini yetiştirmiş olan o insanlar Orta Asya açılımıyla başlayan, sonra dünyanın diğer ülkelerine doğru gidilen süreçte bu başarıyı dünyaya taşımış oldular. Yani öncesinde 5-10 sene Türkiye'de bir staj dönemi olmamış olsaydı Asya ülkelerine açılımda bu kadar başarılı olunamayabilirdi. O da ayrı bir hikmet. Hocamızın ifadeleri içerisinde ele alacak olursak Sovyetler dağılacak. Sovyetler dağılırken bir ilgi olacak. Sizin o ilgiye cevap verebilecek kadar ekonomik gücünüz olacak. Esnaf mütevelli fedakarca sahip çıkmak için hazır olacak. Öğretmenleriniz hazır olacak. Dil bilen öğretmenleriniz olacak. Ve derken o açılan koridordan gideceksiniz oralara. Oralarda o gencecik öğretmenler, o fedakar öğretmenler, o iyi niyetli öğretmenler, o Türkiye gibi nispeten gelişmiş bir ülkeden giden öğretmenlerin ortaya koymuş oldukları başarı, gayret, çaba, çırpınış tabii ki karşılık görecek. Ve o ülkelerde, o Asya'nın ırk yakınlığımız olan o ülkelerde fevkalade bir muvaffakiyete, sonra da oradan da diğer Afrika ülkeleri, Balkan ülkeleri, Pasifik ülkeleri şeklinde bir inkişafa doğru yelken açacaksınız. Bütün bunların şahidi olmuş oldum. Allah Rabbime şükrediyorum. Allah'ım ne kadar güzel bir meslek bana lütfettin. Bu konuda bana yol gösteren abilerime dua ediyorum. İyi ki bu konuda doğru yol gösterdiler. Herhangi bir mesleğe göre öğretmenlik mesleğinin ne kadar kıymetli bir meslek olduğunu her gün bir defa daha anlıyorum. Her karşılaştığım öğrencim hayırla yad ediyor o eski günleri. Çok tatlı hatıralardan bahsediyorlar. Her birerleriyle karşılaştığımızda da Allah'ım dünyanın en güzel mesleğiymiş bu. Büyüklerimiz bu konuda bizi yönlendirdikleri kadar varmış. Sonra kıymeti gitgide daha fazla anlaşılıyor.
At home, Hoca Efendi's role as a moral and spiritual guide drew the attention of the nation's leaders. In May 1992, he visited President Turgut Özal in the United States after his surgery, offering prayers for his recovery. A visit that symbolized the bridge between the state and civil society, built on mutual respect, not politics. The following year, sorrow visited his heart once more. His mother, Refia Hanım, passed away in Izmir in June 1993. It was her quiet faith and devotion that had shaped the man he had become. In 1994, Fethullah Gulen attended the opening of the Journalists and Writers Foundation, marking the institutional beginning of a movement for dialogue, understanding, and cooperation between different segments of Turkish society. There, intellectuals, journalists, and thinkers from every worldview gathered under one roof, a vision that would later blossom into global interfaith dialogue. And 2 years later, in April 1996, he met with the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew's, a historic meeting that laid the foundations for dialogue between Muslims and non-Muslims in Turkey. His message was simple: true faith never fears understanding others, it seeks it. By the late 1990s, his vision had become global. Schools inspired by his ideas dotted the map from Sarajevo to Johannesburg, from Almaty to New York. He received letters from world leaders and religious figures, including a personal message from Pope John Paul II during Ramadan of 1998. A month later, in February, he met the Pope in the Vatican for a historic 30-minute meeting, a gesture of faith transcending borders, culture, and creed. These were the years when faith and dialogue walked together. In the quiet of his room, still surrounded by books, the teacher who once spoke to a small congregation now prayed for a world lit by sincerity.
Hoca Efendi'nin diyalog anlayışına gelince, diyaloğu Hoca Efendi 1994 yılında Gazeteciler ve Yazarlar Vakfı'nın kurulmasıyla hayata taşıdı ama kurumsal düzlemde. Onun haricinde zaten Hoca Efendi'nin ta çocukluğundan bu yana hayatı hep ötekilerle ama ötekileri ötekileştirmeden bir ve beraber olmakta, ahenk ve huzur içerisinde birlikte yaşamakla geçmiş. Dolayısıyla diyalog adeta Hoca Efendi'nin hayatının merkezindeydi. Onun kurumsal düzleme çıkması biraz da içinde yaşamış olduğu şartlara bağlı olarak gelişti ve değişti. Türkiye'deyken Yazarlar Vakfı'yla hem azınlık din mensuplarıyla hem de kendilerini farklı bir camia, farklı bir yapı, farklı bir grup içerisine gören insanlarla, mesela 68 kuşağıyla, ne bileyim kendilerini Atatürkçü, Kemalist olarak tanımlayan kişilerle, Beyaz Türkiye tanımlayan kişilerle devam ettirdi. Amerika'ya geldiğimizde de bu Amerika tabii ki hayatın tabii akışı içerisinde yabancılarla, yani Müslüman olmayan, Türk olmayan insanlarla ayrı bir boyut kazandı.
Fethullah Gulen taught that love and education knows no borders. Dialogue unites hearts, and service is the truest language of faith. From that belief, a dream born in the valleys of Anatolia grew into a movement of light, one still carrying the same truth today. To serve humanity is to serve Allah.
Rüyamda bir gece, ışıklar yağıyordu her tarafa sessizce. Ahenkle işleyen bir saat gibiydi işler. Bir bir silinip gitmişti asırlık teşvişler. Ve herkes birbirine yürekten bakıyordu. Diyalog bugünlermiş. Somaki mutluluklardan kevserler akıyordu. Tertemiz şehreleriyle geçerken kutsiler, hala gözümün önündedir o tertemiz gençler. Ki mesele gençlerle temsil edecekmiş. Tertemiz şehreleriyle geçerken kutsiler, ümitlerimize bir bir ters alıp geçtiler. Yeni bir dünya kuruyorlardı harıl harıl. Her taraf gökle yaraşır gibi pırıl pırıl. Geçtikçe tekmil bu şimşek bakışlı yiğitler. Anladım, muştutu varılan zamanmış meğer. Civanlar gördüm yüzlerinde gariplik rengi. Hükmettim ki bunlar o ilk kutsilerin dengi. Dolaştım her tarafı usanmadan bezmeden. Ziya içenlere ulaştım, erdim bir ulu çeşmeden. Işık içiyorlardı. Şükranla gerilip gezenler vardı kol kola. Sonra teker teker ulaştı herkes ak yola. Evet, bu da ak yol rüyası. Büyük ölçüde gerçekleşen bir rüya.
The 2000s came quietly, like dawn breaking after a long storm. By then, the Hizmet movement had reached hundreds of cities, thousands of classrooms, and millions of hearts. And the one who had planted its first seeds, now forced by his worsening health to live far from his homeland, in a small, humble room in America. In these years of solitude, his pen became his pulpit. He wrote about faith and reason, heart and spirit, the inner ascent toward Allah. His words reached the world. Teachers, scholars, imams, and seekers found in them both instruction and healing. He wrote not to command, but to console, not to be remembered, but to remind. In April 2001, Georgetown University held a 2-day conference devoted entirely to his thought and educational movement he inspired. Academics from around the globe gathered to discuss his vision of faith, service, and universal values. Proof that his ideas had transcended borders and became part of global conversation. That same year, his voice quietly returned to his students through new means. On December 1st, 2001, his talks began to be shared online under the title The Broken Jug. These spiritual reflections reached millions around the world. They were later compiled into books published in 2002 and 2004. In 2002, his health again declined. chronic heart and diabetes issues brought him under care. Yet even in illness, he continued his teaching, responding with humility and patience. When interviewed in 2004 by Turkish journalist Nuriye Akman, he spoke softly but clearly about faith, compassion, and responsibility. The interview, his first in 5 years, stretched across 3 days and was later published as an 8-part series, offering rare insight into his heart and thought. Over the next decade, conferences on his teachings multiplied across the world. At Rice University, Georgetown, and later Louisiana University in 2009, scholars explored the impact of his ideas in education, interfaith dialogue, and social ethics under the theme Islam in the Modern World, Thought and Practice in the Gulen Movement. What began as a few lessons in Anatolia had become an academic subject on every continent. In 2012, at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, a global symposium on dialogue brought together 2,500 participants from over 40 countries. Speakers from Africa, Asia, and the Americas honored the movement's contribution to peace and education. Though he could not attend, Hoca Efendi sent words of praise and encouragement, reminding them that every effort toward understanding was an act of worship. In 2013, the prestigious Mene Peace Prize of South Korea was awarded to him for his lifelong dedication to peace. True to his character, he donated the entire $28,000 award to the Journalists and Writers Foundation's peace initiatives, saying that such honors belong not to individuals, but to the ideals they represent. Through those years, people inspired by Fethullah Gulen continued to serve. They opened schools, built hospitals, offered scholarships, and carried relief to disaster zones. They said, "He taught us that God is closest when we..." Through those years, people inspired by Fethullah Gulen continued to serve. They opened schools, built hospitals, offered scholarships, and carried relief to disaster zones. They said, "He taught us that God is closest when we are serving His creation." His solitude had become the quiet center of a movement that never stopped moving. In his final years in America, Hoca Efendi lived as he had always taught, simply, quietly, and faithfully. The rhythm of his days never truly changed, but only softened. Before dawn, when the birds first tested the air with their tentative notes, he would rise after only a couple hours of sleep. The prayer rug he had once watched his mother unfold in a cold village room now lay at his feet in a quiet clearing of the American woods. Between the breaths of winter and the green sigh of the summer, he kept a single vow, to spend the last of his strength in service that no longer needed his hands, only his prayers. Though his body grew fragile, his presence did not fade. The pen remained on the desk, its ink slower but deeper. Letters continued to arrive from every continent, from classrooms and clinics, from cultural centers and relief teams, carrying stories of students who had become teachers, of homes rebuilt after storms, of strangers who had become brothers and sisters at an iftar table arranged in foreign tongues. He read what he could, listened to what he could, and for the rest, he offered what he always offered most, a prayer. After 2016, when shadows lengthened and the winds turned against those who lived for the sake of others, the world he had helped awaken did not extinguish, it dispersed. The candles Fethullah Gulen had lit in study houses and dormitories, in coffee houses and camps, were carried to new places in harried hands, to the neighborhoods of Europe, to the side streets of East Africa, the avenues of North American language courses, and others as homework clubs and apartment lobbies, as clinics in forgotten villages, and as interfaith dinners where laughter did the work of diplomacy. What survived the storm were not institutions alone, but habits of the heart. The camps of Izmir reappeared in summer schools across the world. The coffee house talks found their echo in libraries and living rooms. The student houses blossomed again in far-off neighborhoods, their kitchens warm with the old spirit of sharing bread and burden. After 2016, many learned again what the 1980s had already taught, that service is not a podium but a posture, not applause but endurance, and not a place on a map but a way of walking through the world. They relearned the discipline of quiet beginnings, that movements do not start in grand campuses but in humble sheds. The seasons turned like pages outside Fethullah Gulen's window, each one softer, slower, as the years gathered quietly behind him. His health grew frail, and the long days of solitude pressed upon him like unspoken prayers. Yet, what burdened him most was not his health, but the pain of seeing others suffer for the cause he had devoted his life to. Each story of loss reached him like a shadow across the snow, and though his body weakened, his heart carried them all, a silent intercession for those who still walked the path of Hizmet. The vision he left behind was straightforward: learn with purpose, live honestly, serve quietly, and care for others. See everyone as part of the same creation. Let faith and science shape your mind and heart. Keep dialogue open even when it's difficult. When faced with anger, respond with kindness. When you lose something, be thankful for what you still have to give. The mission he passed on was just as clear, though simple but not easy. It's to bring knowledge where it's lacking, compassion where it's rare, and honesty where it's most needed. If you have wealth, use it to lift others, and you have nothing, give your prayer. Simply put, live so that others may live. In the end, his long journey came to a quiet close far from where it began. He passed away in the United States on an October night after a lifetime spent in service, teaching, and prayer. News of his passing brought sadness to people around the world. Students, friends, and communities who had been shaped by his words and example. His funeral was held with deep respect and reflection. Those who had worked beside him gathered to pray, remembering his humility, his discipline, and his constant call to learn, to serve, and to love. Though buried far from his hometown of Erzurum, the values he lived for, faith, knowledge, and compassion, continued to live on in the people and institutions he inspired. But this story does not end with a farewell. It continues wherever a lesson is prepared before dawn. Wherever a child is told she is precious, wherever a stranger is welcomed across the line someone else has drawn. It continues in the volunteers of service, who are anonymous, ordinary, and inexhaustible, who still carry books instead of banners, who still measure success in the smiles of students and the quiet of a clear conscience. Some lives are speeches, they end when the voice grows tired. Some lives are prayers, they continue after the lips fall silent. Muhammad Fethullah Gulen's life was a prayer. He learned it at a mother's knee, guarded by a father's lamp, refined by hardship, carried by students, and scattered like seed to the edges of the earth. The winter has been long, but the spring, the hopeful spring he promised, will certainly arrive. And to the youth who inherits Hoca Efendi's mission and vision, do not let the noise of the world silence your sincerity. Build, learn, and serve, not for reward, but for the sake of Allah. When the path grows cold, keep steadfast. The future belongs to those who keep their hearts awake and their prayers alive.